Hi, everyone. Hi, how's everybody doing? Good. I'm not really sure that's very good. I'm really sorry for the delay. As you know, it's a very classic reason, traffic, Jakarta. It's actually also one of our main concern on today's debate. On probably some of you have already heard that we're going to talk about environment and how the issue of environment, how to protect environment is always clashing or has contradicting interest with how our economy should stand. That's one of the issues that we're going to talk about today. But before we start the debate and before we invite the honorable speakers and adjudicators to present on stage, I would like to ask how many of you have heard or have seen parliamentary debates? Can you please raise your hands? Raise your hands. Up, higher, higher, higher. Not the debaters, please. Okay, so I see there's only a couple of you who have ever seen a parliamentary debate. Basically, debates, like any other debates, parliamentary or non-parliamentary, is a clash of arguments. It's about how a person would like to advocate about a certain interest against the other interest. And on today's debate, we're going to talk about environment and the clashing interests between them. And on today's specific debate also, we're going to use a format so people knows whose turn it is to speak and whose turn it is to not speak and sit down and listen. Because only by speaking and listening to, then you have fair opportunities for both sides to shout out what you think about the motion, right? So what we're going to use is a British parliamentary format. It is when we have, like what you see on the floor, is when we have two houses or two sides, which is the government side and the opposition side. They would talk about extremely two different sides of the coin. The government side is going to defend, is going to support the topic, and the opposition side is going to say no to the topic. But interestingly, interest is not only two, right? It's not only about, yes, I would like to do something, or no, I don't want to do something. So we are even creating different houses or different groups to defend a certain positions. That's why we're going to have opening theme on government, as well as closing theme on government, as well as opening opposition and closing oppositions. So you can imagine, although there are two sides talking about the topic, but the two sides is going to be divided again by two sides, which would give you more arguments and more dynamics of the debate. So behold that you're going to see one of the most dynamic and very rich argument type of parliamentary debates that's going to inform you what ideas are clashing on the issues of environment. Okay? Now, I think without further ado, I would like to just welcome the speakers to be up front on the stage. I would like to invite, on the order of governments and oppositions, Mr. Dennis and Mr. Garland as the opening government from University of Indonesia. Can we have a round of applause? Both are national champions of high school debates, and right now they are sitting on their first year university college, sorry. And the second would be, from the closing government, we are honored to have Mr. Diota and Mr. Adiat from English Debating Society, University of Indonesia. Can we have a round of applause too? Both are champions for national debates, and they are also coming to international debates further on. Now, we are going to invite from the opening oppositions. We are glad to have Mr. Naufal and Mr. Lutfi Abdurrahman to be on stage. For now, Mr. Lutfi Abdurrahman is still on the escalator, so we're going to give him 1 minute for running to get here. But beforehand, we are welcoming Mr. Naufal. Mr. Naufal, please come on stage. Mr. Naufal has been awarded the trip to Cancun. He was actually in the summit talking about the environment, representing Indonesia. Can we have another round of applause for Mr. Naufal?
Jakarta.
So he should know something about the environment. Okay, now last but not least, the closing opposition, the team who will close the debate with their rebuttals. We're inviting Ms. Gesa and Mr. Denny. Can we have a round of applause? Ms. Gesa is from University of Indonesia, and interestingly, we have a guest from Atma Jaya debating community, Mr. Danny. So, without further ado, I just would like to let you know that in a debate, we cannot start without a topic, right? So, on the topic of environment, we're going to specify more on which particular topic environment that we're going to talk about. Today, any of you have heard about Kyoto Protocol? Yes? No? Yes. Can somebody say it out loud, please? You know, freedom of expression, people. I'm not going to torture you whatsoever if you say something wrong. Okay, yeah, so you have heard about Kyoto Protocol. Anybody knows what Kyoto Protocol is? Okay, so it's basically an international, I think our panel of adjudicators know it's better than I do, but it's an international regime to control about how nations should protect the environment as a collective action. And within Kyoto Protocol, we have one of the policy or one of the program that is called the REDD, which is the policy to conserve forests in developing nations. Now the question would be, how much is the responsibility for developed nations to developing nations upon forests? Whose responsibility it is to conserve the forest? Is it for those who have already exhausted carbons in the past, or is it for those who still have the forest in the present? That is why we are having the motion of today's debate is that this House believes that developed nations should pay developing nations all opportunity costs to put forest moratorium. So this is a challenge where the government would say that the developed nations should do that and the opposition should not do that. And the last element of debate that you must not forget is the adjudicator, okay? Because you wouldn't know who's going to win, and you would let them talk until, you know, tomorrow or next year without adjudicators giving their comments and decide the winnings. So in today's opportunity, I would like to introduce you to three honorable adjudicators that we have. First, Mr. Dodi Soekardi. Can we have a round of applause? Mr. Dodi Soekardi is the head of working group on land use change and forestry, and he's the member of National Council for Climate Change. And we're so honored to have Mr. Dodi right here today. And the second panel of adjudicator would be Mr. Ibnu Najib. And we have a round of applause for Mr. Ibnu Najib. Mr. Ibnu Najib is the member of the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprise, and he is also an alumnus of STAN University, Sekolah Tinggi Akuntansi Negara. So we see on how we have representative from the environment sector and representative from the the private, the state-owned enterprise, the economical sector. So we have a fair kind of perspective. And to add to make the judgment even more fair on a more debate manner, we are inviting Miss Melanie Teja. Can we have everybody round of applause for Mrs. Melanie Teja? Some debaters must have heard her legendary career in debating, but right now she is representing DANIDA, or the Danish Assistance on Energy Efficiency, and she is also currently the alumnus for EDS UI itself. Now, while having Mr. Upi running on the escalator right now, if by the time he's not ready here, we're sure going to find a solution to that, and don't worry, we're going to have speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Iwan. Can we have Mr. Iwan? Yes, Mr. Ridwan Kurniawan, and he is going to be the timekeeper as well as the chairperson for the debate. He's going to help us conduct the debate, who's going to speak first for how long. Okay, so Mr. Iwan, the floor is yours.
All right. Now, here's the formal rules, right? So I will tell you the formal rules. Please, for everyone in here, please silence your mobile phone. Respect the debate so that we won't disturb with the debate and anything. Please, no loud talk. You can discuss with your friend, of course, but not in a loud way. So please respect the debate. Let the speaker speak and listen. That's the better choice for you guys, right? And the time, normally, the prime ministers here, the government, and each speaker here will spend 7 minutes, and I will have specific code for that. I will clap once for the first beginning of the minutes. That indicates that every speaker in here able to deliver their POI or points of information means in an interruptions or for the speakers in here, right? So that's the method. Usually when the government speakers come in here, then the one who will deliver the POI or the interruption will be the opposition teams and vice versa, right? And I will do once again, clap once again for 6 minutes, indicating that the speaker is already spent for 6 minutes. And I will clap twice at a 7 minute, means that their time should be over. So that's why this is different in a parliamentary debates, right? You can't talk that much, right? You have time limit, and you have to adapt with that time limit. You have to deliver all of your point in that 7 minutes. If it's more than 7 minutes, 20 seconds, then I will do continuous clap, means you have to stop right there. If you're not stopped, then, I don't know, I will just make them stop, right? Can't do anything with that. I have the authority though. Well, anyway, just go directly to the point and the debates. I will call the first speaker in this debate will be the Prime Minister of the government team, Mr. Dennis Victor Kappa. Time is yours.
Check. When people see global warming as a global issue, I see it more as a local issue. I come from Kupang, a place somewhere in East Nusa Tenggara, and it is estimated that by the end of this century, my place where I'm going to live is going to be drowned because of the rising of sea level due to global warming. I see that this is a problem that is becoming a concern towards the problem that we are facing today. Thus, in these extreme cases, we need extreme actions. In today's debate, in whether we believe that the government believe we should enforce the developed nations to pay for the developing nations to preserve their forests, we as the government side of the house stand on the idea that we believe we should support the idea because in this case, the developed nations has the capability and has the power to enforce them to do such thing. On the background that we are going to see in today's debate, we see that the awareness towards global warming is actually there, where people see that this is a global issue, but there's no jolt, ladies and gentlemen, to make these people actually do what should be done to tackle this issue. We believe that as the government side of us, we are going to make this jolt work right now by actually enforcing these people to preserve their forest. How is the mechanism that is going to be brought by the government side of the house? We're simply going to put it this way, ladies and gentlemen. It's simply a stick and carrot mechanism. When we see that if you're not going to follow towards our direction, we are going to sanction you for actually not doing such things. We believe that we are providing a much better option here, ladies and gentlemen. We're actually paying you to actually preserve your forest. Thus, all the opportunity cost that you might lose in the effort of you in preserving these forests that might hamper your economic conditions in the future, we believe thus that would not be happen because we are providing a safety net, which is we are going to pay all the opportunity cost that is going to happen if it's going to hamper your economic reasons. Yes, Denny.
We need you to clarify what you mean by forest moratorium, because preserving forests it's not as easy as forest moratorium. Forest moratorium is a new whole level of preserving a forest. We need to clarify on that.
To clarify on that, the mechanism that we would like to imply here is simple. We're going to make the developing nations preserve their forests, as in we're going to leave these forests untouched, and also we're going to make them also replant, do kinds of reboization, plant more trees, because these forests, they're being chopped down, ladies and gentlemen. These forests does act as a lung towards the world. It does reduce the amount of emissions when we actually have the more number of forests. We believe that by actually preserving these forests, we are able to actually reduce the number of carbon emissions in the atmosphere. Thus, we believe that this is actually one of the ways to counter this, the problem of global warming. We believe that this is not the only way that we can try to stop global warming. No, we believe that this mechanism can also go hand in hand with other mechanisms, and we are also open to all those mechanisms that will be brought in today's debate. But we believe that this is one of of the best way that we would like to promote in today's debate. Seeing the case, no thank you, Upi. Seeing the case of today's debate, when we see that the government side of the House have two major points of clashes, which is arguments, which is first on the idea, we believe that the justification point, whether does these developed nations have the power and the capability to bear the cost to enforce the proposal towards these developing nations. And second idea, and we believe that the developed nations should take the wheel as a role model to tackle global issues, as we've seen it had succeeded in the past. Entering the first case coming from the government side of the House, we believe that why the developed nations can actually have the power and the capability. When we see that the developed nations actually control 60% of the economic market in the world, ladies and gentlemen, they have a lot of amount of, no thank you, they have a lot of resources to actually take care of the economic benefits. We believe that when you are putting a certain burden, ladies and gentlemen, we see that this is also a burden when the developed nation sees that this problem, when they are actually being put more burden to stop, to try and counter the global warming issue. We believe that the developing nations is put under more burden because at the same time, they also have to develop their economic, ladies and gentlemen. Their economic is also as left behind compared to the developing nations. We believe that these developing nations, when we see Brazil and Indonesia are actually depending on the forest to build their economies, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that the developed nations should not add these to extra burden because all countries does have the right to develop its economic, to develop its welfare of the government. Thus, that is actually the responsibility of each state to begin in the very first place. No, thank you. Now, we believe that the developed nations does have the capability. In what way, ladies and gentlemen? The developed nations doing this is actually to support the developing nations in their economic way. They're trying to solve a problem, but also in the same time providing them incentive to actually help these developing nations not to go into an economic burden in the future. When we see that this economic burden is also going to hamper their futureness, whether they are actually going to be hampered when there are going to be crises, when they cannot actually use the forest as a way to gain profit in the future, we believe that the government should do more to actually provide the incentive for them to actually do these kind of actions. No, thank you, Denny. The proposal that we are providing here is going to be very clear because this is more on a moral ethic, ladies and gentlemen. When we see that the developed nations have the capability, they should utilize all of them, ladies and gentlemen. When we see that when the developed nation, this is going to be a both mutual benefit towards both sides. So when we see that the developed nations does not have much of a capability compared to the developing nations, when the developed nations don't have the forest to begin with to actually reduce the amount of emissions, they are actually providing a much better mechanism. No, thank you, Naufal, to actually use the forest that we have now to utilize to actually reduce the number of emissions that we are going to have in the future. This is where it actually going to bring benefit towards both sides of the house because the developed nations, I'll take you in a moment, Naufal, is not going to just leave the burden only towards the developing nations, but it's going to help them in the future. Yes.
The current climate change demands developed countries to give not only reduction of emission but also voluntary help to the developing countries. Do you think it's fair for developed countries?
I think it's fair, ladies and gentlemen, because it's clear that in the very first place, the problem that they created does actually come from the developed nations. When we see that the developed nations are one of the most greatest polluters, now thus they do not actually have a much better mechanism to actually stop what they're doing now to actually reduce the kind of bad impacts that they've done. They need other help coming from other people. This help, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that it does not need to come in free, ladies and gentlemen. It's a form of their responsibility, their moral burden that they've done in the future, in the past, where they actually need to pay back in the future. How? By actually paying these people not to do the same thing in the future, by actually preserving the forest. It's much more better to be that way, ladies and gentlemen. Now, stepping into the second point, whether we believe that the developed nations should actually take the wheel as a role model to tackle global issues. We've seen that in the past when we see that there are actually problems with the ozone hole, when we see that the USA actually took the step in 2002 to actually decrease the number of CFC, we believe that it shows that it's actually working. When the developed nations actually put in effort to actually try to reduce these kinds of problems, it is there. They actually did more of a help. We believe that this is the time where the developed nations should actually step in and try to do much of an issue now. This is why we believe that that we should side with the government. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Dennis spent 7 minutes and 31 seconds. 7 minutes and 31 seconds. To continue the debate, let's call upon the leader of positions in this debate, Mr. Ahmad Naufal Dai. Time is yours.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we also agree that it is imperative to save the world from sinking, but it's not imperative at all to make sure that all developed countries has these obligations to pay for the compensations of developing countries doing good in protecting their forests, ladies and gentlemen. Because we think that in the fight against climate change, we have to take care, we have also to witness the availability of prioritizations in every countries, not only in developing countries, but also in developed countries, ladies and gentlemen. And the bigger goal of our fight against the climate change, it's not only about reduction of emission, but also to make sure that the any mechanism is sustainable and to make sure that it is supported by the citizens of the whole world, and to make sure, ladies and gentlemen, that it is fair to all countries in the principle that we have already agreed to. Before going on to my arguments, I'm going to give some responses to the government side. The first response, ladies and gentlemen, they talk about why this is an obligation for developed countries, because developed countries has the capability to pay. No, ladies and gentlemen, the capability of you to support or to pay is not necessarily translates into an obligations that you have to take, ladies and gentlemen. It has to be taken into a voluntary basis, and that's the mechanism that we agree on. We don't agree on the obligations in a quote for quote for obligations from you, preserving, and developed countries directly paying, ladies and gentlemen. We agree when developed countries are paying or helping developing countries on the basis of voluntary action, ladies and gentlemen. So that's the stance of the negative theme. Second response to this, ladies and gentlemen, that also talk about the idea of why we think the forest is important. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we don't contend that the forest is important. What we think is, why we think is more important, after all, is not only the forest, ladies and gentlemen, but the ability for the world to carry on a collective amount of effort to reduce the climate change. And that is not only happening in developing countries, but also developed countries. My friend are going to show to you why their mechanism are going to reduce the amount of efforts done by developed countries in reducing or investing in more friendly technology, ladies and gentlemen. So that's all my responses. I'm going to talk about my first argument. The first argument, ladies and gentlemen, it is unfair because developed countries already has an enormous burden in the fight against climate change. We think, ladies and gentlemen, we agree on the principles of United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, ladies and gentlemen. The convention that clearly stated that we believe in a common but differentiated responsibility. The idea that developed countries has some amount of responsibility and developing countries has also the responsibility, but on different degree, ladies and gentlemen. In Kyoto Protocol, in any international climate talk, we already give burden for developed countries. Not only a definite quota of the reductions of their emission, but also the obligations for these developed countries to pay for the developing countries' environmental program, ladies and gentlemen. In Cancun negotiations, we've witnessed how developed countries has more obligations in providing $100 billion for the fast track of climate finance. We already seen that these developed countries already have the obligations to pay for the adaptations mechanism from developing countries. We already see this, that developed countries has to be the insurance givers for the loss and damage mechanism. We have already seen developed countries given the obligations to transfer the technology. This is all about the burden and the obligations that developed countries have, ladies and gentlemen.
Important.
We think that adding more burden is not going to be wise because we've seen currently, ladies and gentlemen, that developed countries already sustain this level of responsibility, and we think it's enough for now. Yes, Adiat.
You do think that basically developed countries has more responsibility, and I don't understand why you're saying that adding another responsibility is just inhumane.
We think, ladies and gentlemen, the addition of responsibility is principally different. What developed countries has in terms of responsibility at the moment is that developed countries, because they have polluted the air for quite a time, then developed countries should help developing countries in going to a pro-environment development, ladies and gentlemen. That's the mechanism, that's the principles that we could all agree to, ladies and gentlemen. The problem with this is that these developing countries right now are trying in a way to make sure that developed countries pay because the environment is, as we can see, is being held hostage to the developing countries. That is not the principles that we can agree on, ladies and gentlemen, because that is not going to help the world at all in this thing, ladies and gentlemen. That's the end of my first argument. The second argument, why we think that this is going to create a backlash for the environmental negotiation. Simply, ladies and gentlemen, because all in all, we already learned that in any environmental negotiation or environmental talk, we have to pursue the moderate goal, not too big of a goal that might burden both parties, ladies and gentlemen. Copenhagen talk failed because the goal, the objectives are too large in talking about Kyoto Protocol, the continuation, in talking about other mechanisms. We think, ladies and gentlemen, these mechanisms that entails more responsibility to developed countries are not going to be wise, because it is going to magnify even the considerations for these developed countries like Japan, like Canada, like Australia to even back out for more environmental commitment, environmental talk, ladies and gentlemen. At the current moment, we already seen 4 countries from the umbrella group that is clearly stating that they are not going to commit to the second term of Kyoto Protocol, ladies and gentlemen. These new mechanisms that they're going to add are going to worsen that situation, are going to even burden the next environment talk that is going to be held in Durban, South Africa, ladies and gentlemen. We don't want that. We think that the environment talk should benefit and not heavily burden one side, because that is just not going to create a solution that is going to be acceptable and implementable for all countries, ladies and gentlemen. That's the second point. The third point I'm going to make is that this is a bad policy because it sustains a bad directions of development. Ladies and gentlemen, what we can see from these mechanisms, from the developing countries receiving money because they're keeping forests, is that they're making this mechanism as a passive income, as a passive money, ladies and gentlemen. We think it's bad because of 2 things. One, it is going to create situations in which developing countries are going to be dependent towards these developed countries and this mechanism, and it's not going to be workable in the future, because in the future maybe this mechanism can be cancelled or etc. And that's going to create a huge burden then for the developing countries. But second, ladies and gentlemen, these mechanisms are not giving any value additions to the economy. It does not create more jobs significantly. It does not create any goods that is going to be enjoyed by the whole citizens of that particular country. For example, like in Indonesia or Brazil, ladies and gentlemen. In any way, this is a bad incentive for a bad development, ladies and gentlemen. Because what these countries, India, Brazil needs is not only about the protections of environment, but also the creation of jobs, ladies and gentlemen. What happened if these countries in Africa thinks that this is the easy way to get money? Why should I embark on for development, ladies and gentlemen? That is not going to be fair for the citizens of the country, ladies and gentlemen. So we think that this policy is unfair. We think, ladies and gentlemen, the best mechanisms to pursue an environmental protections is not only reducing the gases, it's not only protecting the forest, but to make sure that the people are getting food, to make sure that this policy is sustainable. And we think up until now this policy is not sustainable at all. Thank you.
Mr. Nova spent 7 minutes and 32 seconds. 7 minutes and 32 seconds. Now to continue the debate again, please welcome the Deputy Prime Minister in the opening government team, Mr. Garland. Time is yours.
Check. Ladies and gentlemen, seeing in the status quo that the solution to reduce the gas emission is not totally working, that the gas emission is still produced in a large amount of numbers, and the global warming is heading to a bad trend, we believe that there must be an extreme solution for these extreme conditions. They only asked us, is our solution feasible? We believe it is feasible, but they didn't explain how the status quo works. And that is the question I'll ask back to them. I'll go on to my rebuttals that concerning the first speaker's arguments, that he explained that this proposal, this solution, is not fair. He explains that it is not quite fair for these developed countries to put more burden to their economy by paying these developing countries. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a global issue that needs a global cooperation. These developed countries also needs their lands to be kept dry, not be intruded by the water of the sea level that is rise. These countries need also to market their products to the developing countries that are still alive, not drowned, like my friend in the first speaker have stated. We believe that it is also their interest to prevent, to reduce the bad impacts of global warming. And it is also their strength and their power to be able to pay these developing countries to preserve their forests. It is not whose obligation to plant more trees, but we see now which part of both sides have the more ability to plant more trees. We see that the developing countries have these more resources to do so. Therefore, these developed countries, since they have cut the trees first, I'll take you in a moment, in their early development of their economy, should compensate and should pay them. Moreover, with the incentives.
Thanks for mentioning global cooperation here, but the question is again, how can you make sure global cooperation could be happen if you keep talking and keep making the developed country pay the bill?
Well, it will develop. First, these developing countries, why do they do not want to preserve their forests? First, my friend explained that they don't have the incentive to do so. Second, because they don't want their economy to be hampered. They do not want to lose that potential economy gain from these forests or from the gold that lies beneath the soil above the forest. So we believe that these incentives, these worries that the developing countries have would disappear because these developed countries could pay them with some amount of money. So they won't be afraid in protecting their forests because they have this amount of money that could protect their economy. So it will develop at the end of the day, thank you very much, for both sides, for the developing countries because they have this some amount of money, and also developed countries because they can keep on producing more economy. So here we believe that it is fair and it is the developed countries' burden to do so, to pay, and it is the developing countries' burden to keep the forest. Yes?
When HIV outbreaks happen, we don't force China to pay because China is rich. Why are now we forcing developed countries to pay because they're rich?
HIV problem is not that much of that kind of threat if you compare to environment issues. If HIV is still here, the epidemic, it will not kill or sweep away our human race just in 100 years. In global warming, in the end of the century, like my friend said, we will see no more Kupang. Maybe my hometown Bali, I could not go home in the end of the century. So this is a really serious issue that we need to protect. Not saying that HIV/AIDS is not a serious issue. It is, but compared to this issue, it is more urgent for us to move now. And the second rebuttal comes to the negative side is upon the countries that are less motivated. These countries will be motivated since what the goals that I've said before, that both sides have the interest. Now going on to my arguments, I have one point of argument that is brought from my case, that it will increase the bond of both sides in combating the climate change. We believe that it is a global problem in its global cooperation, like what I said before in the first place. And this will make the people all around the world in the same page. The conferences like in Cancun and will be held in Durban, for me, for us, it is a good way to level the page, to make these countries play in the same page, to make China, US, Indonesia, and Brazil think that environment is a very important issue. Thank you very much. Most of these developing countries, why they do not want to protect their forests is because they see this inequality, that they have to do this kind of obligation while other developed countries should not. While other developed countries have the chance to develop their economy more by not that much concerning about their nature. Now, by this action by the developing countries like the United States, paying these developing countries to incentivize them to protect their forests, it will give the image to the developing countries that, see, these developed countries, they are concerned about nature, about the environment, by their action in paying us. So this will increase the motivation inside the developing countries that, see, we're not left behind. We're not the one in the bad side. We're not the sidekick in this world. So these developing countries, at the end of the day, will be motivated because of this equal perspective. And this solution is also of a more diplomatic solution. And it is feasible because first, developed countries have no problem. They have the wealth. They have the money. And the developing countries, with the carrot and stick solution mechanism that my first speaker has stated, that it will work. These developing countries will ultimately choose to preserve their forests and get paid rather than not doing so and develop their economy while getting sanctioned. These developed countries, they have a big role in economic in the world. So if they sanction the developing countries, the economic development in the developing countries would not give a good impact to their people. So it will be feasible for both sides. Either it is developed countries or for the developing countries. And this also will increase the understanding between both sides. This kind of working together, cooperation between both sides, between the developing and developed, will increase the understanding between themselves. That China would understand why America produce a lot of carbon emission and they now pay us, and same to America, why China, for example, wants to build their economy too, not preserving their forests, because they see us as an American do the same thing. So here, it will give the understanding between each other, and what my first argument that I stated, the global cooperation will increase, thus it will give a better future, a better perspective for this global problem to be solved. Ladies and gentlemen, when it is a global problem, and people know that it is bad, but has no incentives, we have to give them incentives. And developed countries have the power, have the money to give these developing countries who have the forests incentives to protect them. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Garland spent 7 minutes and 13 seconds. 7 minutes and 13 seconds. To continue the case from the opening opposition team, please welcome Mr. Lutfi Abdurrahman. Finally, he's here. Time is here.
Madam Chair, members of this House, what the government side of the House is basically saying is simply one line. Status quo does not work, and we need to resort to a much more extreme mechanism. Therefore, that would be my first point of response. How status quo actually works to invite participation of third world countries without us having to resort to use extreme amount of money in areas in which it is not effective. Now, how is status quo effective? We think status quo is effective because status quo has invited the participation and initiatives coming from third world countries. They previously mentioned Brazil. Isn't Brazil supposed to be our case? Because even without the immense number of opportunity cost paying, countries like Brazil have been successful in terms of erecting a strong environmental preservation within their country, strong environmental laws in their country, and this trend continues in all of the world. In Kalimantan, for instance, a lot of people in Kalimantan are starting to realize that forests are important and has done a lot of a lot of efforts to preserve environment over there. So what we question is that, how is that not enough, and how would you need that much amount of opportunity cost payment? How do you respond to
In the
that?
Amazon forest, every day 3 football fields have been deterred to dust, ladies and gentlemen. We don't understand why Brazil
We
is one of the
think that
biggest
is an
director of environmental
exaggeration
issues.
because we think that there has been a lot of efforts that is done. Other than that, we think that what this side of the House care is not really the environment. What this side of the House care is forest. Ladies and gentlemen, there is much more about environment than just forest, ladies and gentlemen, and they are neglecting the other facts. That constitutes the end of my first response on how status quo actually helps and how there are other mechanisms in status quo, such as the clean development mechanism proposal being proposed by the UN that has been helping. But my first argument, ladies and gentlemen, would be talking about how we will lose political capital to save everything else that could save environment but forest, ladies and gentlemen. This will come in 2 prongs. When we talk about global warming, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking basically about greenhouse gases, right? That is the main core of the reason why the Earth is getting hotter. And greenhouse gases is created through pollution, and pollution is created through industries. Industries exist in industrialized countries, in developed nations. What they have to do is they have to reform their own industry, and that is the first goal that we want to achieve. This is why a lot of countries are shying away from the last Cancun talk. The reason why Japan is shying away not to extend their Kyoto Protocol participation, the reason why USA is not even in the whole scheme, and the USA is very skeptical about it, is that they would have to do immense number of industrial reform within their own country. Now, if they have that much burden of themselves, as well as now paying every single opportunity cost, every single penny that forest, of opportunity costs being cut in forest in third world countries, we think that would be too much of the burden, and they would just back out of the talks that they have been participating in right now. When they've been softening right now, you would just reverse the whole trend by scaring them out with your ludicrous and very ravenous proposal, ladies and gentlemen. So we don't want this to happen because we want negotiations to be sustainable, and you're definitely not doing that. Ladies and gentlemen, we will not see a reform in the industry, and we don't see less carbon emission being polluted to the earth. We don't want that, right? Therefore, we cannot make them shy away, and we have to let them continue reforming industries by not putting a draconian policy over this. Second thing that I'd like to say in terms of losing political capital, ladies and gentlemen, is that we think right now we have already given, we think that developed nations have already given a lot of effort in terms of helping developing nations in tackling global warming, because there's more to do than just forest moratorium. There's more to do, such as efforts of adaptation, ladies and gentlemen, or for example using biopore technology, or for example to making alert techniques in terms of when a disaster is coming, from using alternative housing, for instance. Where would people go if flooding starting to happen right now? People that is living in Ancol, for instance, needs to be moved to Bandung, which is a higher ground, for instance, in Indonesia. People who live in Maldives, for instance, have to be relocated to higher grounds. And that is really not easy. We think that these efforts of adaptation also need a lot of money, also need a lot of contribution from developed nations. When developed nations are immersed, all of their money are poured into one particular recipient, which is forest. This makes us lose the power of us to diversify our efforts to tackle climate change. We will lose our efforts to do adaptation. We will lose our efforts to make people evacuate on time because we're too focused on forest moratorium, which by the way will only work 100 or 200 years later, and we will lose our power to save people in short term. We think that's bad. We think in terms of saving global warming, you have to diversify it as much as possible, which is why we believe to stick in status quo, because status quo is the exactly flexible option where things could be diversified. Dennis.
No, your status quo shows that there is actually, you want these industrial reforms. Now, when you see that your solution in the status quo is heading to a deadlock, and we are providing a much solution that
it's not really a deadlock, Dennis, because it's being talked about. But secondly, if you talk about deadlocks, it will be even more certain of a deadlock the moment you do this policy, right? So you're making the things worse. We don't live in a perfect world where countries would just do industrial reformation, but you're making the world worse by doing your proposal. That's bad. Lastly, my substantive, ladies and gentlemen, my second point of substantive would be talking about how we think that absolute fairness or anything that is close to being fair will never be achieved in the scheme of opportunity cost, right? Because the idea of opportunity cost, that you evaluate forests of how much it is worth, and you ask and you oblige developed nations to pay exactly that much amount of that value that has been calculated in terms of that forest. Well, we think this calculation needs to be performed for the payment to be fair, ladies and gentlemen, but we think that valuation of forests will never achieve anything close to fair, anything close to accurate, because there is a lot of things in forests that you cannot make materially countable, ladies and gentlemen. For instance, how do we calculate a cleaner air that creates less respiratory problems for citizens, that may make them healthier, that may make them work better and make them happier? Ladies and gentlemen, how do we calculate the value of less landslide that forests provide by more water seeping into the ground? How do we calculate the value of more water seeping into the groundwater reservoir, because there is the roots of the trees that creates that sort of water runoff going down to the ground, and all those things, ladies and gentlemen. If the valuation cannot be performed, what does that mean? That means that any sort of obligation being imposed to first world countries will be deemed as unfair. If this is deemed as unfair, what will happen? What will happen is that they will think this whole scheme is scammy. Kyoto Protocol will get all the more becoming a laughing stock of the international world, because this is not even close to anything accurate. It's not even close to anything realistic. It's not anything close to anything tangible. It is made by the women demands of the third world countries. We don't want to render the international negotiations and international movements for environment to be scammy as that. And we don't want to make it unfair, which is why we think that you have to oppose this motion.
Mr. Lutfi spent 7 minutes and 29 seconds. So that's the end of the opening debates. To continue the debate, we have now closing debates. And the first speaker will be the member of the government, from the government team, closing government team. Please welcome Mr. Diyota Marsudi. Time is yours.
ladies and gentlemen, what we've heard from the opening half is responsibility, moral responsibility, burden, etc. What is the root cause? We see that the root cause is money. So the stance of the closing government is we're going to say that this opportunity, this investment in forest by developed countries is a business opportunity, is a key successful factor to the environment and to businesses worldwide, both developed from the developed countries' perspective and the developing countries' perspective, ladies and gentlemen. I would prove that how that proposal is first of all sustainable for the developed countries that they're talking about, and it also adheres to the survivability aspect that is needed from the developing countries' perspective. But before I go on to that, I will respond to what happened in the opening half, especially in the opening opposition. See, the main idea coming from opening up was points of responsibility, how this is a bad policy, and how it's unfeasible because there's too much money involved, and because how you cannot really measure externalities. First of all, I'm going to say how unfairness and responsibility isn't the case. Because if you're saying that unfairness exists, well, unfairness has already existed in the status quo, because we're giving extra burden to the developed countries because they're deemed a little bit more responsible to cause global warming than the developing countries, ladies and gentlemen, because they develop quicker than they in a moment, Upi. So we see that unfairness is already happening, and it is within the responsibility. It is already a consensus that it is more of their responsibility. So I don't see why this is harmful. Yeah.
When unfairness happens in status quo or things that are not clear, then it's not that status quo is perfect, but it's just that you're making things so much worse once you do this policy because this is just too extreme. How do you respond to that?
I don't see how this is much worse. If they're saying we're spending too much money, then cut back on the proposals of cap and trade, because that's not really effective that we see, and invest them directly into forest. If the only response is money, we see that we could always allocate money from proposals that aren't working to proposals that are working, ladies and gentlemen. So we don't see a strong stance coming from opening up. Second of all, no, Denny. Second of all, in terms of how you measure opportunity cost, right? Upi saying that how the water goes into the land, etc., etc., etc. Well, we call that externalities, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, they can always be measured, and second of all, if they can be measured, then they won't be measured, ladies and gentlemen. What will be measured are the monetary values that is directly given to the government or to the people. So we see no big problem. Case closed. Before I go on, last POI.
How long will we do this?
Well, it depends on the moratorium. I can't say Indonesia will stop it for 5 or 10 years. It depends on how on what they agree upon, ladies and gentlemen. See, what they forgot is the term moratorium. What does that mean? Temporarily, ladies and gentlemen. So what we're doing is buying time. What we're doing is giving them time to catch up on the head start that developed countries has already have, right? So what we're trying to do is, I'm going to say that this, from a business perspective, it's a business opportunity for both parties. It's a key successful factor for the environment and for the business to sustain themselves. Why so? Because as I said, this proposal, mutually exclusive, is sustainable and adheres to the survivability of developing nations. It's sustainable. Why? Because when you cut down trees, that will mean there are no plants to take in CO2, and no plants to take in CO2 will mean a dramatic increase in global warming, etc., 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 drowning, natural disasters, like they said, right? So besides that, how do you quantify that? You quantify that by how, like Upi said, how you try to allocate people to higher ground, how you try to change your industry, how you try to sustain yourself, ladies and gentlemen. In more practical reasons is how you sustain a certain business, how to make the economy go around, right? So what we're trying to do here is try to make this sustainable as possible for business people, right? For business people, and it is sustainable for business people because if there's no flooding, if there's no misallocation, if they don't have to give more CSR to people who get natural disasters, they could use that money to actually invest in more productive means. And second of all, it adheres to the term survivability. Why? Because they haven't responded to the fact these forests are very important for the local community. Why so? Because we see that their main livelihoods come from that forest, either from farming, either from taking wood from that forest, or making them into little cooperacies, ladies and gentlemen. We see that it is the direct benefit. That forest has direct benefit from the people, and that is why it is very, very important to give direct benefits back. So what this proposal does, why is it a key success factor? Because it adheres to two things. It is direct and tangible. Why so? Because when we look at the proposal, it is direct and tangible in two terms. Because first of all, it gives money to the governments, and it gives money to the people. In status quo, what's happening is most of the green proposals are G2G proposals, right? Developed countries give money to developing countries from government to make sure a proposal happens. What we're doing here is more a direct and tangible approach, right? We're giving a government responsibility to try to protect their forests, to try to actually maintain the amount of wood that's in their country, and we'll also give direct compensation because opportunity cost to the people, right? So besides the government's willingness for them to participate in more green movement, it also attracts the understanding of the grassroots society to actually know why the forest is important, why the forest needs to be sustained, why they're giving this amount of money for us to protect the forest while we plant more trees, while we make our forests bigger, ladies and gentlemen. It is more understandable for all parties. No, thank you. Time's up. So when you look at that, we see that our proposal is first of all feasible, right? Their only stance is there is not enough money. We'll take money from the proposal that's not working, i.e. cap and trade, and put it into our proposal. Problem solved. Second of all, we see that they say that you can't measure the opportunity cost. We say you can. So the only thing that's stopping us is what, ladies and gentlemen, is how we prove that it is financially feasible and financially profitable for countries, developed and developing, to actually put their money and put their attention in this proposal. We proved it how? Because we say that trees are such an importance to how the global climate is, to how you sustain a business both in the developing and developed countries. The businesses will want to stay sustainable. And the countries from the developing aspect will see that you're giving me direct incentives for the government, and you're also giving direct incentives for the people to create to understand why the forests are important. So what we see here is this is actually a business prospect, this is actually a business opportunity that we need to take together, and this is also environmentally feasible. Thank you.
Right. The other spends 7 minutes and 18 seconds. To continue, to open the case from the closing opposition, please welcome Ms. Gesa, the only woman. Time is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that this debate has forgotten one very important question. That is, why is the environment important for us? The closing opposition believes that the purpose of the environment is for us to exploit it so we have sustainable use for it in the future. And we see that the mechanism of the affirmative side of the house does not provide the sustainability that we want, so that for now, our society can use the forest and preserve the environment, and also for the future, not only developed countries, but also developing countries are empowered to independently protect their environment. And we see that this can only be done without their mechanism of having developed countries pay developing countries to preserve the moratorium. Now, with the opening side of the opening debate has talked a lot about the philosophy of how this is unfair because it's putting too much burden on the developed. The closing is going to leave that debate and focus on why we need the developing to take a better role in preserving the environment. And because of that, now I'm going to first rebut the ideas coming from closing government. They talked about how they want, first of all, on this idea that this forest needs to be preserved, and the only way for us to be preserving it is by giving this, no thank you, by giving these incentives for them to completely not use it at all. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that the idea of moratorium is not something that will serve this purpose. Because what's happening right now with the moratorium is that society is not allowed to use these forests at all, where they they don't only, and when you don't have a need for that forest, we also see that you lessen your responsibility to preserving that forest. And I'm going to explain that more in my argument. Second of all, we don't agree with this extreme idea that society is really exploiting the forests right now. We believe that currently the governments of society, the governments of nations are having efforts to preserve their forests, and how the government of Indonesia is separating the land where they want to use this for environmental preservation, and also separating the land that is going to be used for economic use for the purpose of sustainability in the future. And we see that this is completely fine, and we want to continue this in the status quo. Yes.
The problem with that is you're only preserving one football field for the preservation, and you're exploiting 10 football fields for your economic benefit. We believe that the mechanism does not work. You're continuing to exploit, but you're not giving any room to preserve.
We believe that that is an exaggeration of what is happening in the status quo. We see that even though right now countries may be using more land for economic benefit rather than for environmental use, that this use for economic benefit is necessary for them to have better environmental policies in the future. Now, lastly, on the idea of the closing government, on how they believe that their mechanism would provide direct and tangible benefits because it's going to give direct incentives not only to the government but also for the people. We see that this idea is not exclusive to their mechanism of, to the motion of providing, having developed monies paid developing for a moratorium. That this is simply an argument on reallocation of how money should be transferred from developed countries to developing countries, and so it does not serve their purpose and their burden. Now, I'm going to go on to the extension of the closing opposition. Basically, what the closing opposition is going to prove is that we believe that this idea is not philosophically wrong, not only because it is unfair, but also because it is against the principle of environment that needs to have sustainability towards the future. First of all, we see what is going to happen underneath their proposal. Right now, what will happen is that they are going to be giving the societies of the developing countries money to not touch their forests at all. They say they're going to do this for a limited time, but we don't know for how long. What we're going to prove is that we say that this kind of method is not sustainable for protecting the environment, because as the opening already explained, the money that you will need to use for opportunity cost is not a small amount. It's going to take a large amount. Now, even if we assume that that money will be provided underneath, no thank you, that money will be provided under the status will be provided, we say that money at a time will have to come to an end, because as Diota already explained on how money needs to be reallocated from some budget to others, they are agreeing to the idea that money that we have is limited, that money at one time is going to come to the end. And as the opening said, that the developed is going to do this as long as they have the capability. We believe that once the developed nations have seen that they have put too much money into this and that they do not want to serve the interests of the developing anymore, then that money will be pulled from the developing countries. And so we see that the developing countries will not have a higher platform, because in the process of them being in the moratorium and receiving the money, we see that these developing nations do not have the incentive to actually find ways to preserve the environment. They also do not have the incentive to find ways for new industries so that their economy can also grow for better capability in the future. And so what's going to happen is that whilst they are doing their moratorium, we're going to leave these developing countries very stagnant at what they are, and also very disincentivized to actually find ways to preserve the environment, because they believe that they are doing just as much when they are receiving this money. Yes?
Don't you think the whole idea of a moratorium is giving them time to adapt, to create new ways, and to plant more trees, so in the end they'll be more sustainable?
But we believe that you can have better capability does not come from planting more trees. That you have better capability when you figure out how to use your trees more effectively, when you figure out how to actually develop your industries in a way that not only preserves your environment but also improves your economic capability. Because to have good environmental policies, you do not only need more trees than what you would normally have if you want to do industries, you need also the capability to implement these policies. And this is not going to happen when we have these developing countries not do anything in the process of the moratorium. So we see that in the end, what's going to happen after this moratorium has stopped is that the developed countries will no longer want to actually put money into these developing countries because they believe that they have done enough, while the developing do not have any means to actually start being independent in preserving their environment. Also, in the end, what we have after their proposal is 0 point. We have not at a better platform than we have today if we implement this kind of proposal towards developing societies. So because we believe that we want to have the environment better prepared, because we believe that developing countries, when they see that the environment is necessary for them, they are going to take better care of it, they are going to be more creative in thinking of ways to preserve it. We see that it is best that we do not put a moratorium towards the process of these developing countries, but we leave it at the status quo because we want our environment to still be used. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Gesa spent 7 minutes and 26 seconds. To close the case for the government team, please welcome Government Whip, Mr. Adiat Pramana. Time is yours.
Mr. Speaker, let me explain to you the cases of forests in the world, ladies and gentlemen. Indonesia is number 4th of pollution, not because of too much traffic in Jakarta, it's because of 52% of the problems of we don't have forests, ladies and gentlemen. The issues of illegal logging and the issues of fire forests. Or maybe about Brazil, that because of Lula, that actually has a good economy, but right now they don't want to even stop cutting Amazon to the fact that, hey, you developed countries have done this in the past, why are we not allowed to do this, ladies and gentlemen? In the end, the reason why we thought that the problem to protect forests is, which we think is very important. We can say on many things. That basically forest is much better than any technology for green technology. Green technology is only reducing waste or making waste less harmful. We change the waste into a better thing, ladies and gentlemen, into oxygen, ladies and gentlemen. That's the reason why forest is much better. But not only that, forest also preserves culture, preserves life, ladies and gentlemen. The jobs sometimes are there to begin with. That's the reason why we think this is a good option. And we think that because of the reason of how basically developing countries do not want to do this because of economical reasons, that's why we will propose this, because this is the best incentive which goes to the grassroots level of the people. Now, let me give you some rebuttals. First to the closing opposition. Now, the closing opposition was quite weird in explaining that two things. That A, developing countries had no interest. Well, this is true, as to what I explained to you, but then the reason was because of economy. And that's the reason why we proposed this, because in exchange of how you protect the forest is, we give you some money. We don't think that we're not solving the problem. But then she has another problem of saying that, look, the problem is not about not cutting trees, but using trees more effective. Now, firstly we can't use any trees if we don't have trees, ladies and gentlemen. And the problem is the trend is going that way. But second of all, what we're doing in our proposal is that thing. A, we preserve the forest, but B, we gave money to help you to use the forest better, ladies and gentlemen. So absolutely extensions are quite false, but let's just give Danny a good reason why.
Sir, we never have the problem with moratorium. What we do have a problem that we do the mistake by cutting our forests. As a developed nation, we do take the benefit of all economic value, and then suddenly we ask other countries to pay for the damage.
No, I mean, like, basically what they're forgetting about this, it's about consensuality, ladies and gentlemen. Whether or not some countries would like to opt to this is basically up to these two parties. Okay, up to those two parties, whether to want to pay for green technology or maybe to forest, ladies and gentlemen. We think this is a valid option because they've never explained why, if a country would like to pay forests instead of going to green technology, they can't go there, ladies and gentlemen. This is the basic problem of this. And when they say that the issues of that it's too heavy, we say that that's the reason why it's moratorium, ladies and gentlemen, because we think that it's both an exchange of how it's not that long, in terms of how we're giving time to developing countries to help develop new technology, but on the other hand, we don't overburden developed countries to keep paying for these forests, ladies and gentlemen. That's what we think of how the proposal is good. Now, the second thing is the main core of the debate, of how unfair versus fair trades. What they believe here is basically that, A, this is unfair because it's too burdening developed countries, which we don't think so, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, that basically the issues of whether or not developed countries should pay more. This is obvious because basically we've already consented, even the Kyoto Protocol, that developed countries should be burdened more than developing countries. We don't understand one bit of logic in that position. But second of all, what they're lacking here is how much is the effort of developing countries to protect forests. We think it's hard, ladies and gentlemen. We think the idea of illegal logging, the weakness of law, ladies and gentlemen, is just too hard for developing countries to actually try to have a better standard to protect forests. Even Indonesia admits in reducing forestation without any outside help, they can only gain about the addition of 26%. But with an addition from NGOs and help from other countries, they would like to give a better target of 41% of decreasing forestation. Now, we think of how protecting forests is hard, especially due to the fact that developing countries are not as strong as developed countries. And we think that both of these things are fair, since A, developed countries are paying for what they should have paid, and developing countries are trying to do what was before is hard, but right now it's much more easier, ladies and gentlemen. So we think all in all, it's good. Yes?
If historical blame is abused this much, the first world countries will just think that we'll do that and not do industrial reforms and not do adaptation helps and not do further negotiations. How is that not jeopardy to the environment?
This goes to the case of the opening opposition. First of all, about political capital, of how when you go overburden, people would back out, ladies and gentlemen. Like before the enactment of Kyoto Protocol, everybody thought Kyoto Protocol would back out every country, ladies and gentlemen. And in fact, it didn't, ladies and gentlemen. And the fact is, Kyoto Protocol has been signed and ratified by many countries. But what we say here is how they have never seen to the fact that maybe to some countries, the option to pay forests to other countries is a cheaper option. To some Eastern European countries, the idea of how enveloping technology, especially green technology, is expensive because they don't have the enough capability and human resources to make researches. Researches are hard, ladies and gentlemen. Not only you have to have much money, but also trial and error is costly. But unfortunately, that's a part of research. And some countries would like to opt, though they want to go green, but they would like to opt for some lesser and much more cheaper things. And we think this is in this case, where basically forest can be cheaper things, and it depends on how the agreements between both countries. Like when they say that whether or not it's overburdening, we don't think so because the burden depends on what they consented to. And we think they would consent onto the best interest. When he said about the issues of adaptation, we say that we're tackling a bigger solution of problem solving. If you think of how we're stopping green about pollution. Right, so going to my extension, what has been explained in the closing government is the idea of how we go to the grassroots. The basic idea why forests cannot be protected is about environmental damages. We think why this would be going increasingly well is because it goes to the idea of how businessmen, every entity of economy will go to these things. Developed countries want a sustainable development of their entrepreneurs. While in the meanwhile, developing countries want to protect their forests but must have an ensurement of economical benefit, ladies and gentlemen. We think this is already agreed in even the societies below there. Like they don't want to do illegal logging if they were given a compensation of benefit. And we think due to the fact that we gave the grassroots level from the national and to grassroots reasons of whether or not you should protect forests, therefore, we as the closing government, we would like to hug a tree. Thank you very much.
Spend 7 minutes and 4 seconds. To the last speaker, the opposition whip. Please welcome Denny. Time is yours.
As the last speaker of this exhibition, I would like to take the liberty to talk for 10 minutes. It's the last time, it's been a long time since I did not talk in the public. Well, first of all, this is a nice, cool place for hangout and debate, right? You know, this is the coolest stage I ever been debate. Even the WUDC Antalya is not like this. And look at the audience so eager to take a note in their iPad. Cool stuff, right? I think America should, give a free iPad for all of us. Right? You know why? Because they are capable and have the money. That's what the government suggests. Right? That's what they suggest. They have to give everything free. They have to give more money because developed countries have the money. capable of doing that, without really analyzing whether it solves the problem or not. That is the basic problem with the opposing government side of the house. They're basically talking about it's good. It's good to take money from rich people, rich country, because we need the money. And then we start to link it back to how this will preserve. But it's not really going to solve the problem, as my closing opposition talked to you before. So basically, that's the biggest mistake that's been done by the government side of the house, right? Money, power, it's not justification. It's not justifications to deal with this issue. Now, on the closing opposition, closing government, they're basically talking about how this is a good investment. The question is, there is no elaboration of a good business opportunity. Basically, they're only talking that, hey, developed country, instead of giving aid for disaster aid or another aid, let's allocate the money for this proposal because the other proposal is not working at all, which is not far from business opportunity elaboration. But however, we are talking to you on how the money is limited and we need to preserve the money on the best proposals. Now let's see how the debate goes. On the first level, the first opening debate, they keep talking, the government talking about how it's a fair or not, and it's fair or not to let develop. We say it's not fair. Moreover, this unfairness led to a dependency from developed to developing country and vice versa. And at the end of the time, I will explain later that this will create a worse condition after the proposals is done. Because we cannot do this forever, right? We need time, we are buying time, but what after that? What incentive will developing country have if the proposal is over, if the project is over? Now, yes, Dita.
To answer that, transfer green technology. But the main question is, if power and money is a determining factor for you to contribute in the green movement, then I ask you, what is the determining factor in all conventions and all protocols?
It's simple, because everyone will affect it. That's why we need a shared responsibility. That's why we need developing and develop to grow together. Now, I will explain back again why we believe that actually the proposal could work only without the idea of paying for moratorium. First of all, we're never against the idea of moratorium. Moratorium is necessary when it's necessary, okay? We're never against the idea of forest preservation. We never agree about how to save the environment. We never oppose the idea at how local community have to be protected, ladies and gentlemen. But we against the idea that in order to make it happen, we need somebody to pay all of the costs, all of the opportunity costs, which is going to leave us no incentive at all. Now, how can United States of America have this much fun, interest of making Crete such a cool place that even Indonesia government never bother to do? Because they have the power, because they have the capability. Where do this power came from? Economic power. And where does economic power came from? Incentive and pressure. Pressure to do it on your own, pressure to do it the best. Economic means you have to produce things cheaper. It means on environment context, a cheaper energy, a cheaper light, cheaper electricity. Now those incentives are necessary to motivate all countries to preserve their resources, limited resources, to gain the benefit of economic and preserving the forest. Now let's see what happens if United States of America start to paying Brazil and Indonesia to preserve the forest. Now, I do believe that actually in Aceh and in Brazil, moratorium start to happen. In Aceh, it already happened for a very long time. It's proof to you that we don't need the fund to stimulate people to do moratorium. Now, the question is, what if we give the money, the carrot in front of the rabbit, to preserve the forest? At the end of the time, when the money is gone, we have nothing left. The money is gone, the forest is not preserved. Because it's going to be very different atmosphere if we, as Indonesia, as developing country, know that, hey, the forest will be gone, we need to do moratorium, and we don't have money. We need to find a way to solve the bureaucracy, to deal with illegal logging, to deal with our police officer and a forest ranger who deal with illegal logging, and etc., etc. But if US give the money, those incentives will be gone. Government will have no incentive to improve because government are already in a comfort zone. We have the money from the United States of America, from the Europe. Why we'd like to do more? That is basically what would happen. And as the closing up position, we like to argue that basically those whole proposals, the preservation will not happen under the government proposal, and it only could be happen. The sustainability program could only be happen if we let out the money from the US. Yes, Noval.
Sir, like even developing countries do know that this is a moratorium agreement. So of course they know that the money won't be there forever, and they do know that they need to adapt quickly before being pressurized to embargo and etc.
Yes, but more pressure if we let out the money. My question is, people start to think in the short term. That's why the problem of environment happened in the first place. Now, if we have the money now, why current government have the incentive to preserve the forest if the program, for example, lasts for 20, 30 years? That's the question that needed to be answered. Now, you admit that pressure is needed. My question is, we give a better pressure. Now, the point is, we already proved to you that we are capable to do it by ourselves. There is a carbon trading, there is a transfer technology, there is a REDD proposal, and etc. We do have the capability, but we don't want anybody paying all the opportunity costs for all of us. Now, not to mention that how this is impossible to be implemented because suddenly the opening government says there will be sanction, and then suddenly the closing government say that there will be consensual. But however, we need to really see at the end of the debate which one could provide a more sustainability, which one could let the developing nation help themselves to preserve their forests. And we believe that paying all the opportunity costs is not the way. Thank you.
Okay, so that's is the ends of the debate. So usually if the debate ends, the debaters or adjudicators leave the room so that we can have a neutral time for the adjudicator to decide who is the winner, who is the best speaker in this debate. Adapting the condition, I guess the adjudicators also is already set up, so they want to discuss outside and want to decide who is the winner of the debate. So that's exactly the end of the debate. I will say thanks to you guys for respecting the debates, not making so much noise, and the debates goes well. Thank you for all of you. Hope you also got a prize. Well, anyway, so after that, I will give the microphone back. Oh yeah, this is the normal culture in the debate. So we are not fighting each other. We are shaking hands. Because this is just a debate. So when you do debate, maybe you have a different opinion and you kill each other with rebuttals. But this is friendship, right? The beauty of friendship, actually.
Okay, thank you, Iwan, for saving us the friendship of debating. Can we just give another round of applause for all 8 great speakers who have told you what it feels like if we are going to pay for developing countries to save the forest. Okay? Now, just a quick review. I think I'm just a bit curious whether the iPad is just, too interesting. So then, they talk less probably, and then you can just push the button and you don't really listen. So I just want to have
iPad is interesting.
Hello, hi, hello. Okay, I just want to have I don't know. Can anybody tell me what was the reason why developed nations such as America or China, America or European countries should give money to developing countries such as Indonesia to save their forests? Can you tell me one reason why? Why did the whole bench of Dennis, Garland, Diota, and Hadiat, what did they say? Just one reason why. Can I have the guy with the very funky hair? Oh no, the lady say so.
Very good.
Very good. Yeah. I don't think people can hear you yet. Or Marina, can you please just go down here so people can see you too, so you'd be on screen. Can you come down here?
Okay, my name is Marina. Okay. I'm from UBS, Uni Sadeguna Business School. I want to answer your question, why America or Europe pay the more money to Indonesia like this? Because Indonesia have the biggest forests in the world, and they must to safety. And if Indonesia can produce or keep the forest more growth, it can be help to dig the global warming like that.
Thank you very much. That's very
You're
good. Can we have
welcome.
a round of applause for Marina from UBS? So yeah, that's sort of true, right? Because global warming needs forest. Because forest absorbs the carbon dioxide, right? Because forest helps to cool down the weather. And if Indonesia has that much of forest, probably we can cool everything off, right?
Cool or hot, of course. I hope.
Yeah.
But the thing is, moreover, that's true because when you cut one tree, it's not only means that the tree's ability to absorb the carbon dioxide is that, but you also release carbons again. When you take down the roots, it releases the carbons because the carbon can't be captured with the roots. When you use the wood, it will release against the carbon because, when it's burned, then carbon release. So that's why this is really a big issue.
Yeah, so it's double trouble.
Double
Now,
trouble.
we want to hear from this side. Can anybody share what they hear from the bench of oppositions? Why did the bench of oppositions of Nofal, Upi, Gesa, and
Denny.
Denny, why did they argue that developed nations, America, European countries should not give money for this developing nations?
Should not give money that big.
Yes, I think the lady with the brown veil wants to answer. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, what was one? Can you just name us one reason why the opposition is against the idea?
Opposition?
Opposition, right?
Well, because it's just not fair to only burden one side of the world, aka the rich countries, the first world countries, because it's everybody's responsibility. So it's just not fair to keep burdening those countries.
That's very true.
Yeah, that's very true.
Can we have another? Oh, sorry. What's your name and institution?
Egalita from International Relations, University of Indonesia.
Okay. Can we have a round of applause for
Please, round of applause
Egalita?
for Egalita. Egalita.
Yeah, moreover, you remember the Denny's opening speech. When rich people have money, they should give it. When at America have iPads, they should give it to everyone, right? So
Agree,
if that's the
more
logic, we're waiting for the free iPads on the way home. Yes, probably, yeah.
So that's
I think, yeah, that's basically it. Thank you for your time and to listen both sides of the story. Now we're going to give the time to Miss Melanie Teja to give her verbal adjudication and decide who gets to win the debate and wins both of the prizes.
And why, of course. So please, yes, sir.
Okay, first of all, I would like to relay the apologies from Pak Dodi Sukadiri because he has to leave. But his message is that he's very surprised. He thinks all the debaters are very advanced in their knowledge in climate change. And this is coming from the National Council of Climate Change, so it's a very impressive compliment from him. He also said that you guys should join the climate project, the training by Al Gore. So, like to advance it further. Well, we're going to look at, because I want to make this, like a bit more suspense. So I'm going to just look at the philosophy of each team very briefly before we go into who wins and who loses. The opening government, we think, came up with a good setup. The setup is we're in a desperate situation. Therefore, it's about who can. It's not about who should. It's about who can, because it's desperate. And I think this is, I think it's being simplified a bit by their opponents by saying, no, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Yeah, but they also put another philosophy that says, yes, but the situation is so desperate, that's why, it becomes a different context. For example, if iPad determine my life and they can provide iPad, they should. And by the way, it is. So, I'd be happy to get iPad. So that, I think it's a very good setup. The biggest problem with that, because your main philosophy depends on whether it will solve climate change or not, then you have to prove it. You cannot just say, they need to preserve forests. Good, let's preserve forests. How does preserving forests suddenly make Kupang not drowned? I mean, it's probably a bit, everyone knows it, but you need to explain it because it's part of your philosophy. Now, with the opening opposition, we think opening oppositions came up with lots of great arguments. The problem is because it's not as much as elaborated, it creates tension between one another. For example, you come up and say, it's unfair to make them pay. But then you said we should make them pay for adaptation. I don't get it. You just told me that it's unfair to make them pay, and now you want to make them pay for other things. And the other time you said status quo is working right now. Like they already give money voluntarily. The other point, you come up and say, no, right now they're backing away from giving money because they want to do industrial reform. So is status quo working, or are they backing away? So I don't think it's necessarily contradicting, but because it's not elaborated, it creates tension between one another. We think that the closing government, in all fairness, we don't see a very explicit extension. However, we think they finished the job of clarifying why preserving forests is actually solve the climate change issue, how it will at least a step further towards reduction of emission. We wouldn't say that's the strongest strategy, but at the end of the day, we think it stands. Now, the closing government also came up with a really good approach by stating that it creates dependency. But the problem is the government already set up a case where the status quo is very bad. And then you come up and say, yes, but with your proposal, 7 years later, it will still be bad. Yeah, but they buy time 7 years, in the end, it's still a good thing. Like, even if you manage to prove your case and come up and say, this is only temporarily, I still think, temporarily good is still better than constantly bad. So that's why it's a bit difficult to look at the philosophy. But overall, what's very interesting is that you all come with different approach, very distinctive. So we think that's a very good debate. I want to make this more suspense, but I think it's quite clear that we give the winning to the closing government. One thing to note, and we think it's very important, is that there's a lot of jargon. For example, like opportunity cost. One of our, fellow brilliant educator here, who specifically, like you said, coming from economic side, was asking, who will you pay the opportunity cost to? Is it to the farmers? Is it to the industry? Is it to the, whose opportunity costs are we looking at here? And there's a bit less nuance in this debate, which we think can be further. Having that said, we think, all 8 speakers have done a brilliant job. We would like to congratulate them. We would like to congratulate specifically for closing government. And the best speaker, we actually have a difficult time in determining the best speaker between 2 people from the winning team. But in the end, we give it to the man in the collared shirt, Diota Marsiti. But it's a very close one, so if you want to fight for it, go for it. Okay.
Thank you very much, Melanie. And we would like to welcome winners to come in front of the stage and
best speakers and the teams.
The prize of today's debate. Perhaps a short
what?
5 seconds response. How do you feel?
Okay, come.
Can we have both winners? And
Please
Mr. Aldiato, please. Okay, what do you think about the debate, and do you guys predicted the results?
If it's a la Miss Universe, it's like, oh my God, I did not know we're gonna win. But I'm sorry, not funny. We're debaters. Well, we're flattered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we did not really expect this. I mean, like, it's cliche, but no, we did not expect this. And yes,
because we thought we weren't pragmatic. No, we weren't down to earth enough. Like Melanie said, there was no ending to our argument.
And we thought the extension was true. It was not clear.
For those who don't understand, we think we did bad. Yeah, well, that's it. But we're very happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Another round of applause for the both winners. And right now, we would like to tell you that the prize that we have is a surprise. Okay,
it's a surprise.
we would like to welcome Mr. Arian Ardria from Ad America to hand over the prizes for both winners. Can we have another round of applause for both
Please,
winners?
round of applause for them.
Mr. Arian, do you want to have comments, short comments?
We just want to welcome everybody here. Thank you very much for coming. We hope that you like this as a forum for your debates. It's great to hear all of the arguments on both sides of a very important topic. I always found it very hard to argue against climate change, but I heard some halfway convincing arguments on the topic. No, it was very well done, and I hope all of you come back for what I'm sure will be many more debates, lectures, speeches, but also a whole range of different kinds of performances here at America. So thank you very much again. Congratulations on the winners, and hopefully you'll be back.
And the best speakers, of course. Again, for Mr. Arian, please.
And once again, congratulations.
Okay, from applause.
Okay, so we got the prize for the best winner is a VCR video camera that we believe would be very, very beneficial if it's being donated to the debating society in Indonesia. Okay, yeah. So we thank both speakers and both debaters, and we give you time to go back to your seats. Iwan? Okay, I think that's basically it. Now to wrap up, Iwan has our conclusion question.
So, what debates give to you?
Yeah, after looking at our 1 hour debate, what do you think debate gives to you, and how can we utilize debate in our daily life? Anybody want to share anything? I want the guy with the funky hair to say something right now.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jasman. I'm from UBS, Uni Sadaguna Business School. Well, I think the debate was pretty rad. It was pretty cool, pretty tense, and I think this is a new high level for me because the everything was very, very cool. And I think I can get 1 or 2 from this debate. At least I could think of more preservative action of our environment. So less throwing garbage and such thing like that. Maybe if I were a government or something like that, I will use those debates into my. I will take them into my meeting and talking with the others, so we can make our environment good than before, better than before. Okay, that's it.
We also hope that thing happens.
Thank you very
Not
much.
stopping here.
So everybody should vote for Jasman in 2014, okay? Now, one person from this side.
From this side, what debates give to you? Not saying it gives me
this one.
camera.
Oh, I think the.
Oh, again.
Yeah, last speaker probably who would represent the whole bench of audience.
Okay, my name is Enos Lewidampo from Sekolah Tinggi Perdebakan Indonesia. Actually, pakai bahasa Indonesia aja. Here, they are really good debaters. We are really good debaters. But this is just my challenge. Why don't you take action from now? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So we have 2 candidates for presidency 2014. Either Jasman or the guy with the brown jacket. Okay,
All right.
so.
Close it. Now, just close it.
Okay, last but not least, we would like to thank for the chance given to the Indonesian debating community, us representing EDS UI, EDS Atmajaya, as well as SEF ITB, who comes far away from Bandung only to perform. You guys to see one of the most qualified exhibition, and also our panel of adjudicators, Miss Melanie Teja, and also Mr. Ibnu Najib, who has given the time, as well as Mr. Dodi, who has given his precious time to be here with us. Yes. So as a conclusion, we would like to just thank everybody and goodbye. See you sometimes in the future.